Most flowers you plant in June will be gone by October. You will spend the winter looking at empty beds, spend money next spring buying replacements, spend another summer maintaining plants that peaked once and will never do better than they did the first year you grew them. That cycle is the default for most gardeners, and most gardeners accept it without questioning whether it has to work that way. It does not have to work that way. There is a category of flowering plant that operates on a completely different logic from annuals and from the fussier perennials that demand specific soil chemistry and precise watering schedules and still manage to disappoint you half the time. These plants do not peak and plateau. They strengthen, they expand, they send their root systems deeper into the soil every winter and come back the following spring larger and more productive than they were the year before. By year 3, they are so well established that drought conditions that kill everything around them barely register. By year 5, a single plant you put in the ground for a few dollars has become a spreading colony that is producing more flowers than you have vases for. They are called perennials, but that word undersells what the best of them do. Calling them perennials is like calling a compound interest account a savings account. Technically accurate, but missing the essential point that the thing keeps multiplying on its own while you are not paying attention to it. The 8 plants in this script were chosen on a specific set of criteria that most plant lists ignore. Not just that they come back every year, because many perennials come back every year while requiring enough maintenance to make you question whether they are worth the trouble. These 8 were chosen because they strengthen over time rather than weakening, because they multiply without becoming invasive, because they are genuinely resistant to the pests and diseases that plague more temperamental varieties, because they perform better in lean soil than in rich, amended beds, and because the maintenance they require across a full season amounts to a few hours of attention rather than the weekly commitment that keeps most gardeners perpetually behind. If you are planting in June, which is when most gardeners are finally ready to commit to a new bed after the last frost has cleared and the soil has warmed, these are the plants that will reward that timing most generously. They will establish through the summer, build their root systems through autumn, overwinter without intervention, and return next spring already past the vulnerable first-year phase that kills so many perennials before they ever reach their potential. The first plant is the hosta, and it deserves more credit than it receives from gardeners who have not watched one develop across 5 or 6 seasons. Most gardeners think of hostas as a shade solution, something you plant in the difficult corner where nothing else will grow and leave it at that. What most gardeners do not realize is that a hosta left in place and allowed to mature becomes one of the most spectacular foliage plants available to any garden in any price range. Here is what happens to a hosta over time that makes it genuinely immortal in the sense this script means. In year 1, it establishes and looks reasonable. In year 2, it returns visibly larger with more crowns and richer leaf color. In year 3, it begins to look like a serious plant, the kind that makes visitors ask what it is. By year 4 or 5, a single hosta planted in good shade has expanded into a clump that can be divided into multiple plants, each one capable of repeating the same developmental arc. I have spoken with gardeners who planted a single hosta 15 years ago and now have an entire border of them that they created entirely through division without ever purchasing a second plant. Hostas come in sizes ranging from 8-inch miniatures, perfect for edging a shaded path, to 4- and 5-foot giants that create genuine architectural presence in a dark corner. The foliage ranges from solid, deep green to variegated patterns with cream or white margins, to blue-tinted varieties that look almost surreal in low light. The variety within this single genus is wide enough that you could plant an entire bed with nothing but hostas and have legitimate visual interest from spring through autumn. The care requirement is simple enough to describe in one sentence. Plant in well-draining soil in partial to full shade, water consistently for the first month, and then leave it alone. Soggy winter ground will kill a hosta. Dry summer shade with occasional deep watering will produce one of the most reliable and increasingly spectacular plants in the garden. Plant hostas early in June before serious heat arrives. Water them daily for the first 2 weeks. After that, water deeply once per week through the first summer. Next spring, they will return stronger than they left. Every year after that, the return improves. The second plant is the coneflower, and it is the plant that most dramatically demonstrates what this script means by immortal. A coneflower planted in June will produce its first flowers by late July. Those flowers will attract bees and butterflies in numbers that make the plant a genuine wildlife destination. The bloom period runs through August and September, and sometimes into October, depending on your climate. Then, the flowers fade and become sculptural seed heads that goldfinches and other seed-eating birds strip through the winter months, while the bare stems add structural interest to the dormant garden. The following spring, the plant returns. It comes back with more stems, fuller growth, and more flowers than it produced in its first season. In year 3, the expansion continues. In year 4, you have a plant that is genuinely dominant, producing dozens of flower heads from a clump that has more than doubled in circumference since you planted it. Coneflowers are native to North America, which means they evolved in this continent's specific combination of weather patterns, soil conditions, and pest pressures. That evolutionary history produces a plant that handles drought, handles poor soil, handles heat, and handles the insects and diseases that devastate less adapted varieties without requiring any intervention from you. They are happy in full sun and tolerant of partial shade. They come in purple, pink, white, orange, and yellow, with both single-petal and double-petal forms available. They range in height from 2 feet to 5 feet depending on variety and growing conditions. The one management technique that produces better coneflowers is counterintuitive. Do not over-enrich the soil. Rich amended soil produces coneflowers that grow fast and soft and flop over in summer rain. Lean, average soil produces coneflowers with strong, upright stems that hold their flowers at the proper height throughout the season. When you plant in June, use the existing garden soil with minimal amendment. Add perlite or coarse sand if drainage is poor. Do not add bags of compost or slow-release fertilizer. The plant will perform better without them. Space coneflowers 18 to 24 inches apart, even if the plant tag says 12. They will look sparse in the first season and fill in properly by the third. Crowded coneflowers compete for resources and produce fewer flowers than well-spaced plants given room to develop their root systems fully. The third plant is Geum totally tangerine, and it is the plant on this list that most gardeners have never heard of, and that most gardeners who encounter it for the first time cannot believe they have been gardening without. It produces bright apricot orange flowers on stems 12 to 18 inches tall, beginning in late spring and continuing through June, July, August, and September with virtually no interruption. That bloom period is longer than almost any other perennial available at the same price point, and the flower color, a warm orange apricot that photographs as almost luminous, fills a gap in the color range that most perennial selections leave empty. The foliage is low and ferny, with a texture that remains attractive even during the periods between flush bloom cycles, when some perennials look ragged and spent. Geum does not have a spent period in the same way. It simply keeps producing. Plant it in virtually any soil condition. Clay, sandy, rocky, poor, it handles all of them without complaint. Once established after the first season, it becomes drought-tolerant enough to go weeks without supplemental watering. It does not require staking, it does not require fertilizing, it is not significantly bothered by any common garden pest. The plants that perform best in my experience are the ones that receive the least attention after establishment, which makes this plant ideal for any gardener who wants results without commitment to ongoing maintenance. The fourth plant is Russian sage, and it solves a garden design problem that most gardeners struggle with without identifying it as a problem. Most perennial beds have a heaviness to them, a static quality where everything sits at the same visual weight and nothing moves. Russian sage introduces lightness and movement that changes the character of everything planted near it. It grows 3 to 4 feet tall and produces tiny lavender blue flowers on airy branching stems that catch every breeze and create constant, gentle movement through the garden from midsummer through autumn. The silvery green foliage is attractive before the flowers appear, and the dried stems hold their structure through winter, providing visual interest in the dormant season that most perennials cannot offer. Plant it in full sun with well-draining soil, lean rather than rich, and it becomes one of the most structurally valuable plants in the garden with almost no effort required to keep it performing year after year. Part 2 covers the remaining 4 plants, including the one that blooms in the dead of winter when every other plant in the garden is dormant, the one that changes color completely between summer and autumn, and the one that has been documented flowering continuously for 7 months in mild climates, along with the practical planting and soil preparation guidance that determines whether these plants reach their potential or simply survive. The 5th plant is the hellebore, and it earns its place on this list by doing something none of the other 7 can do. It blooms in winter. Not late winter when the first crocuses are already appearing and spring feels imminent. In the actual dead of winter, in January and February in most climates, and in December in milder zones. When every other plant in the garden is dormant and the beds look like abandoned ground, the hellebore opens its flowers and holds them for weeks. The flowers themselves reward close inspection in a way that summer perennials rarely do. They hang slightly downward on their stems, which means you need to lift them gently to see the full face of the bloom. And what you find when you do is a level of intricate detail and color variation that most summer flowers do not approach. White with burgundy speckles, deep plum shading to almost black at the center, soft pink with a green throat. The color range within this single genus is wide enough that a bed of mixed hellebores produces something genuinely different from anything a summer garden delivers. They are also evergreen. The foliage persists through winter, providing structure and greenery when everything surrounding them has died back completely. By the time spring arrives and other perennials begin waking up, the hellebore flowers are fading, but the foliage remains, still attractive, still providing the low mounding ground cover effect that makes shaded areas look tended rather than neglected. Hellebores want dappled shade and soil that drains well. Wet, soggy ground in winter is the one condition that will kill them. If your soil is heavy clay that holds water through the cold months, amend it significantly with sand and perlite before planting or choose a different location. If you can give them good drainage and filtered light, they will live and bloom reliably for decades. 12-year-old hellebores producing winter flowers are common in established gardens. 20-year-old specimens exist. These plants genuinely outlast most other investments a gardener makes. Plant hellebores in June, and they will not bloom until their first winter. That is not a problem. It is an opportunity to let them establish their root system properly before the flowering demand begins. Water consistently through their first summer, reduce watering as temperatures cool in autumn, and wait. The reward arrives when nothing else in the garden is delivering anything at all. The 6th plant is Arkansas Blue Star, and it gives you 2 completely different visual experiences from the same plant across a single growing season. In spring, it produces feathery, fresh green foliage that has an airy, delicate quality unlike the heavier foliage of most perennials. In late spring through early summer, it covers itself in small, star-shaped blue flowers that attract pollinators without demanding attention the way larger, showier flowers sometimes do. The flowers are quiet and charming rather than bold, and it produces them generously. Then, something happens in autumn that makes this plant genuinely remarkable. As temperatures drop, the entire plant changes color. The green foliage transitions to golden yellow, a warm, glowing tone that intensifies as the season progresses and persists well into fall when most other plants have already gone brown and shapeless. You get 2 months of that golden color in most climates before the plant finally drops its foliage and goes dormant for winter. Arkansas Blue Star establishes a deep root system that makes it genuinely drought-tolerant by its second season. It stays between 2 and 3 feet tall, which makes it useful in the middle layer of a perennial bed without dominating shorter plants in front of it. Deer largely ignore it. Disease is almost non-existent. It does not require staking or deadheading. Once established, it asks almost nothing and delivers 2 distinct seasons of visual interest from a single planting. The 7th plant is lavender, and it belongs on this list not just because it is beautiful and reliable, but because it is one of the few garden plants that rewards you through multiple senses simultaneously. Every time you pass it, you receive a fragrance that makes the garden feel like a more generous place. Every time you cut the flowers, you have material for fresh arrangements, dried bouquets, sachets, culinary use, and the dozens of other applications that make lavender one of the most genuinely useful plants in any garden. Lavender wants full sun and lean, well-draining soil more than it wants almost anything else. In heavy, rich, moist soil, it grows soft and floppy and becomes susceptible to the root rot that is the primary way lavender dies in gardens that otherwise suit it. In dry, lean soil with full sun, it becomes an increasingly structural and fragrant presence that grows stronger every year. After the first bloom cycle, cut the spent flower stems back by about a third. This keeps the plant compact and often triggers a second flush of flowers in late summer that extends the season significantly. The eighth plant is Geranium roseanne, and it may be the single most impressive performer on this entire list in terms of the ratio between what it asks and what it delivers. From late spring through the first hard frost, it produces bright blue-purple flowers continuously, without the bloom gaps that interrupt most perennials mid-season. In mild climates, that continuous bloom period stretches 7 months. It sprawls and rambles in a way that allows it to climb through neighboring plants, creating combinations where the blue geranium flowers appear to cascade through the foliage of whatever is growing nearby. Plant these 8 in June, following 3 non-negotiable principles. First, use lean soil rather than heavily amended beds. These plants evolve to perform in average to poor conditions, and rich soil makes them soft and prone to the flopping and disease susceptibility that makes maintenance-heavy perennials frustrating. Second, space wider than the plant tag suggests, because these plants get larger every year, and crowded plants produce fewer flowers than plants given room to develop fully. Third, water consistently for the first 4 weeks and then reduce frequency as the plants establish, because deep, infrequent watering encourages the deep root development that makes these plants genuinely drought-tolerant by their second season. Follow those 3 principles, and these 8 plants will outlast every annual you have ever purchased, every temperamental perennial you have ever replaced, and quite possibly the garden itself as you originally planted it. They will keep multiplying, keep strengthening, and keep flowering long after the work of planting them has been forgotten.